In the heart of bustling Rome, there is a place so small that you could walk from one end to the other in just a few minutes. No mighty army, no factories, no natural resources on the world map. Vatican City is little more than a tiny dot, easy to overlook if you are not paying close attention. Yet from this small space, decisions, messages, and calls have echoed far beyond its borders, reaching billions of people across the globe. Presidents listen, nations pause to consider, and over the course of centuries, the direction of history has more than once shifted from this place that seems so fragile. Why does the smallest country in the world possess such immense spiritual power? What allows the Vatican to wield influence without weapons, yet still have a voice in humanity's greatest questions? Does this power come from faith, from tradition, or from a system of influence built over thousands of years? In this video, we step into a space that is both quiet and profoundly powerful to understand why the Vatican, small in territory, has become a spiritual center with global influence. When people think of the Vatican, many immediately imagine a country, defined borders, a national flag, guards in uniform, and official seals. But if we view the Vatican through the same lens as an ordinary nation-state, we risk misunderstanding its true nature. The Vatican does not exist to govern territory or population. It exists to preserve and project a spiritual center that was formed nearly 2,000 years ago. What sets the Vatican apart? From the very beginning is its purpose. Nations are created to protect people, resources, and interests within a defined geographic space. The Vatican is the opposite. Its territory is merely a necessary shell, meant to safeguard something far more intangible, the spiritual leadership of the global Catholic Church. Even if one day the Vatican were to lose its land, walls, or squares, its spiritual essence would remain intact. The true center of the Vatican is not its buildings or stone boundaries, but the papal throne and the bond between the Pope and billions of believers worldwide. For Catholics, the Pope is not simply the head of a small state. He is the successor of St. Peter, a symbol of continuity in faith from the earliest days of Christianity to the present. It is this spiritual relationship that gives the Vatican a weight no ordinary country can replicate. The Vatican also does not operate through coercive power. It does not impose laws to govern the daily lives of millions beyond its borders. What it possesses instead is moral influence. A message from the Vatican does not force obedience through violence, yet it can shape thoughts, consciences, and actions among communities of believers across continents. This is a form of soft power, sustained by voluntary faith rather than compulsion. The Vatican's history reflects this reality. Through wars, territorial fragmentation, and political upheavals in Europe, the Vatican has repeatedly lost and regained land, yet each time, its spiritual role endured. In many periods, the absence of material power even made its moral voice stand out more clearly, serving as a counterweight to worldly authority. In this sense, the Vatican resembles a spiritual heart rather than a fully formed political body. It requires a small physical space to exist independently, but it is not confined by that space. Its influence is not measured in square kilometers or population figures, but in the reach of the faith, symbols, and traditions it represents. So when we call the Vatican a country, that is merely a convenient formal description. At a deeper level, the Vatican is a singular spiritual entity, one whose power does not come from territory, but from its ability to reach the minds and faith of people across the world. At the heart of the Vatican, beyond stone walls and solemn rituals, stands the figure of the Pope. But if the Pope is viewed as a king in the worldly sense, the essence is lost. Papal power does not rest on the ability to command or coerce, but on symbolic authority and the faith that billions of people choose voluntarily to place in him. The Pope is regarded as the successor of St. Peter, one of Jesus Christ's earliest disciples. This belief creates an unbroken line of continuity, stretching across nearly 2,000 years of Christian history. For Catholics, the Pope is not merely an individual, but an embodiment of continuity itself, the past, the present, and a living tradition of faith condensed into a single human figure. It is this sense of continuity that gives the office its exceptional spiritual weight. Papal authority, therefore, does not operate through compulsory orders. The Pope has no army to force nations into obedience, nor legal mechanisms to punish those beyond Vatican borders. What he possesses instead is moral voice. When the Pope speaks about peace, poverty, war, or human dignity, he is not issuing political directives, but appealing to conscience. People may agree or disagree, but they cannot easily ignore him. Symbolism plays a central role in this form of spiritual power. The simple white cassock, the shepherd's staff, and the ancient rituals are all designed to convey a single message. The Pope is a spiritual guide, not a worldly ruler, repeated across generations. These images become deeply embedded in the minds of believers, creating a sense of trust and stability in a constantly shifting world. This symbolic authority also allows the Pope's influence to extend beyond the Catholic community. At various moments in history, popes have acted as mediators, calling for dialogue instead of confrontation, restraint instead of escalation. Secular leaders may not share the same faith, yet they still listen, aware that behind the Pope stands a vast community of believers and a moral tradition, capable of shaping public conscience. Crucially, spiritual authority exists only as long as belief remains alive. If believers turn away, the Pope has no instruments to compel them to return. Paradoxically, it is this fragility that defines the uniqueness of papal power. It is not imposed, but renewed daily through trust. It is the power of words that are heard, not commands that are enforced. Thus, when we speak of the Pope's power, we are describing a rare form of influence in human history, one that does not rely on territory or force, but on symbol, tradition, and the ability to reach the deepest moral and spiritual dimensions of human life. And it is precisely this that makes the role of the Pope both solemn and fundamentally different from all other familiar forms of power. The power of the Vatican rarely appears in the form of commands or coercion. It has no tanks, deploys no armies, and imposes no treaties by force. Yet for centuries, the Vatican has remained a constant presence in the world's most consequential issues. This influence comes from a different source: soft power, power rooted in belief, moral authority, and the ability to shape how people think. First and foremost, the Vatican commands a global network that very few entities can match. The Catholic Church is present in nearly every country, cutting across political borders, cultures, and languages, unlike administrative international organizations. This network is bound together by personal faith. When the Vatican issues a message, it does not spread through bureaucratic directives, but through sermons, schools, hospitals, charitable institutions, and the everyday religious lives of millions of local communities. This form of influence is slow, but deep and enduring. Another central pillar of Vatican soft power is moral credibility. The Vatican rarely aligns itself with a specific political faction. Instead, it positions itself as a voice of conscience. When it speaks on peace, war, poverty, migration, or human dignity, it does so not as a geopolitical power, but as a long-standing moral reference point. This perceived absence of competing material interest often makes the Vatican's voice easier to hear, even among leaders who do not share its faith. Vatican diplomacy further illustrates this soft power approach. Rather than applying public pressure, it prioritizes quiet dialogue, mediation, and patience. In many cases, its role is not to impose solutions, but to keep channels of communication open when others have collapsed. The Vatican may not resolve conflicts on behalf of states, but it can create space for dialogue, precisely because of its reputation for neutrality and trustworthiness. Symbolism is another crucial instrument of influence. Papal visits, images of simplicity, and gestures of compassion are widely amplified by global media. These acts carry no formal authority, yet they possess a powerful ability to shape public emotion and perception. In a world saturated with information and competing interests, symbols can sometimes move societies more effectively than policy statements. The Vatican has soft Power is also evident in its capacity to frame the moral context of global debates. On issues such as social justice, environmental responsibility, and human rights, the Vatican rarely proposes technical solutions. Instead, it raises questions of responsibility, ethics, and conscience. By shaping how problems are morally understood, it indirectly influences how societies and eventually governments respond. Notably, this form of power is not fixed or guaranteed. It depends entirely on the level of trust the Vatican maintains. Every moral failure or institutional crisis has the potential to weaken its influence. This makes Vatican soft power both potent and fragile. It cannot be sustained through coercion. It must be continuously renewed through consistency between words and actions. Ultimately, the Vatican represents a model of influence that runs counter to the dominant logic of modern power. Without violence or vast territory, it exerts influence by engaging belief, ethics, and symbolism. In an international order often driven by hard power, the Vatican's continued relevance serves as a reminder that other forms of power still exist. Quiet, gradual, yet capable of spreading deeply and enduring over time. States, whether they possess formidable militaries or vast economies, all operate within a finite space of power. They can coerce, punish, or apply pressure through material force. Yet there is a boundary that hard power struggles to cross: conscience, legitimacy, and social acceptance. It is precisely at this boundary that the Vatican becomes a distinctive point of reference, one that many states find themselves compelled to listen to first. The Vatican represents an independent source of moral authority, unlike international organizations that are closely tied to competing national interests. The Vatican does not directly contest economic or military power. This distance reduces suspicion that its voice serves short-term strategic goals. When the Vatican speaks, states tend to recognize that it is not maneuvering for advantage, but articulating a moral position grounded in a long-standing value system. That independence generates a sense of legitimacy that raw power alone finds difficult to manufacture. Second, the Vatican is inseparably linked to a global community of believers. Billions of people across continents regard it as their spiritual center. For states, ignoring the Vatican effectively means disregarding the significant dimension of their own citizens' moral and spiritual lives. Even secular governments understand that social stability rests not only on law and economics, but also on shared beliefs and values. Listening to the Vatican, therefore, is not an act of concession, but an acknowledgement of social reality. A third factor is historical continuity. The Vatican has endured through the rise and collapse of countless empires. This long historical memory grants it a unique status. It is not merely a contemporary actor, but a witness to extended time. For states, especially governments defined by short political cycles, engaging with an institution of such historical depth allows decisions to be framed within a broader perspective that extends beyond immediate interests. Vatican diplomacy further reinforces this respect. It rarely employs confrontational language, favoring instead a cautious, discreet, and mediating approach to states. The Vatican often appears as a non-threatening interlocutor, one that does not apply public pressure or issue ultimatums. This makes listening politically safe, particularly in sensitive or contentious matters. Ultimately, the respect states afford the Vatican reflects a deeper reality. Power is not measured solely by the capacity to coerce, but by the ability to be recognized as legitimate and morally grounded. The Vatican exists as a reference point beyond ordinary politics, a space where the actions of states can be examined through the lens of universal values. Listening to the Vatican, therefore, is not an admission of superiority, but a recognition that even the strongest power requires moral legitimacy to be accepted over time. When looking at the Vatican on a map, we see a space so small it appears almost fragile. Yet when we view the Vatican within the flow of history and the spiritual life of humanity, we encounter the opposite, a center of influence that extends far beyond all geographic boundaries. This contrast is not a paradox, but the key to understanding spiritual power. The Vatican is not powerful because it can force others to obey. It is powerful because many people choose to listen voluntarily. This power does not operate through commands, but through authority, symbolism, and a system of values accumulated over centuries. In a world where power is often associated with military force, economic strength, or technology, the Vatican represents a different kind of influence, slow, persistent, and enduring. What is noteworthy is that spiritual power is never absolute. It exists through belief, and it can weaken when that belief is damaged. For this reason, the Vatican possesses great influence while constantly facing the challenge of preserving its own legitimacy. With no army to defend its authority and no coercive means to sustain its influence, the full weight of the Vatican rests on the consistency between its words and its actions. The story of the Vatican reminds us that in the world order, power does not come solely from the ability to control, but also from the ability to provide direction. A moral voice, if sufficiently enduring and trustworthy, can travel farther than national borders, and a small space, if it becomes a symbol, can carry greater weight than vast territories. Perhaps for this reason, the Vatican does not need to be large to be respected. Its presence raises a deeper question for each of us. In a world dominated by hard power, do spiritual and moral values still have enough space to create lasting influence?